And I'm like, yo, when was the actual date of this episode? You know, I couldn't find it. And you want to know why? Nobody had archived the 1988 to 1995 episodes of Yo MTV Raps anywhere.
Not even MTV?
Not even MTV. And I was like, how is that possible? It was only 7 years, you know? There's no archive for the early episodes of Yo MTV, of Rap City on BET. There's no archive for Pump It Up episodes, you know? So when we're trying to look for accurate information, there's nowhere to go.
Let's get it started.
Double O.
Free range, motherfucker. 1 2 1 2. It's your boy Double O, and we are back. Another week, another new podcast, Free Range. This week on the show, I have the illustrious, and I mean that in the most literal sense, Dart Adams. He is a hip-hop historian, a journalist, and just an overall wealth of history and information about the culture and a whole lot more. We've talked on Twitter now for a number of years, and I love the fact that I get to use the podcast as a way to further those and have deeper discussions outside of 140 characters. So we sit down and we talk about his need to oftentimes hate on people who love to use misinformation to make points online. But really, the bulk of the conversation centers around this assumption that people often have that because it's online, it's true. And because online exists, then everything that has occurred in the real world must exist online. And those two things are very much not the case. And so we really deep dive into a lot of the history that has the potential to fall into digital gaps and just be erased totally. You can follow Dart Adams on Twitter at Dart, D-A-R-T, Adams. Again, you can always follow me at GoDouble, GODOUBLE 0 on all platforms. Questions, comments, freerangetalk@gmail.com. And you know the website, thefreerangepodcast.com. Let's get it. What up, world? This is Double O, and you're tuned into the Free Range Podcast. And I'm excited for this one, especially because of what's been happening on Twitter. I have the illustrious hip-hop hater of haters slash, I feel like you have that issue where you can literally remember everything that's happened every minute of every single day.
Yeah, it's been a curse.
Since you've been young, but we got Dart Adams on the podcast. Man, thank you for taking the time to do this.
No doubt, that's what I'm here for.
So I wanted to jump right in because especially I didn't even want to comment on it because I wanted to kind of save it for this. End of last week, a very hilarious conversation started on Twitter regarding, your post of Chinese village b-boys going in and somebody talking about stealing black culture, right? So I actually wanted to jump right in because you were around for it. When did or do you consider hip hop? Let's start here. Do you consider hip hop a product of the diaspora or something that is inherently African American?
Okay, so here's my thing on it. I believe that I've been studying this for a long time. I believe that black music is a continuum. It shaped American music and American culture, but black music is a continuum. And in that continuum, that means that we have all these different branches. And from these branches, different trees sprouted. And then you have, branches going out, and then you have subgenres, and it just goes out like a river, right? And they have all these different like tributaries and everything else. And then it like has fjords and all this other shit. But with black music specifically, it has a continuum, but then it has these little divergent paths. And I feel like hip hop is a divergent path from the continuum. And you start out, you have all the influences of like rhyme talking and everything else, and you have the Jamaican culture with the sound clashes and the DJ culture and all that attributed. But then you have gang culture in New York. You have graffiti culture, which really kind of started in Philly, and then at the same time was in New York. There were some prominent Philly cats who moved to New York and helped like the graffiti scene blow up in the early 70s. But it's with hip hop and like b-boying and all that shit, I believe that it is a a part of the continuum of black culture. But the beauty of hip hop is that it absorbs, and it's like a gumbo that takes all these different influences and all these different things into it, and it still remains hip hop. But at its core, yes, it's black culture. But the problem is there are a lot of people that want to override and completely erase everybody's contributions to this culture and just say, bam, it's black. Yes, it is black in origin, but many peoples contributed to it, and many peoples took that culture and spread it and put in their own seasoning, just like with food, right? You have different immigrants come into a town, come into a city, come into an area, a region. They bring their own influences, and then you have fusion. And a lot of people hate that word, and they contribute and they make this, and now it's a new thing. But it's still sprang from that same original.
Yeah, but to be real specific though, like when most people talk about hip hop's origins, when most people talk about, and I was obviously in New York, but incredibly young at the time, but it only ever looked like a, much like America, a melting pot of local plus immigrant influences,
Yes.
especially. And so when I think about it, I think that it starts out as a diaspora conversation
Yeah.
because of the proximity of all of, and to be very specific to the people that won't know, because I'm sure Dart and I are about to use a lot of big words in this joint. When we talk about the diaspora, we're talking about the larger pan black identity that is inclusive of the Americas and Africa as well, and also African immigrants throughout the world. So you're talking about anybody that has come here that is essentially, a a direct result of slavery throughout the Caribbean, throughout South America, throughout Central America, and then obviously the original. So when we talk about the diaspora, just for the people that may or may not know, that's what we're talking about. So
My
to
Honduran
me,
father made it a point to say that he was a black man who spoke Spanish, and the only difference between all the different black folks all across the world is that the slave ship went to different ports and stopped different places.
no, I agree, but it's interesting because I feel like, and then my argument is there was a time when it was a lot more of a melting pot idea, and as it leaves New York, it becomes attached a lot more to a direct idea of African American blackness. Whereas like so even though you may have people like Kool Herc that are pulling so much of their stuff from Jamaica, when we talk about the sound clash, when we talk about the DJ, the original idea of the DJ, all of that after, and you can tell me the exact dates, I almost feel like as gangster rap starts to coalesce is when it starts getting directly looked at as this thing that is inherently African American, not necessarily just a product of everybody who was in the hood and stuck there at the time.
I kind of feel like that started for me. So rap and hip hop as we know it first got national attention, but a lot of people don't really go back this far. 1981 is when we get the first national TV coverage on ABC 2020 of, hip hop, right? And then 1981, that's when Mel Brooks makes "It's Good to Be the King." I believe like not too long after is when Funky 4+1, Blondie brings them on and has them perform on Saturday Night Live. You know, like so, right there is where I think people started to associate hip hop with black, right? But then in 1984, when the first mainstream films are made about rap, that means Breaking, that means Beat Street, unfortunately Body Rock. Yeah, like these movies come out and it's like, even though like Lorenzo Lamas is one of the worst Latinos in history, people associate it with black. Even though when you look at the screen, everybody's not essentially like just black, but they just associate everything with blackness. And the thing is that also what happened was, it started doing well in the mainstream. Run DMC's album comes out, blows up. Houdini's album comes out. So they're associating the genre with these black artists, and that's just what it was from then on. It was just a black thing. And then that just grew as the genre grew, as it did more and more numbers, as it got better. Coming into the late 80s, it's just black.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because, like, I mean, I was too much of a kid during the 80s, but, my, early 90s and all that stuff is when I kind of come into it. And what I always noticed, at least growing up in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, is that it still, even then, does have this Caribbean conversation that is continually going on between people like Heavy D, between people like Busta Rhymes, even Super Cat and Salam Remy. And there's this like connection that feels like it's always there, but then at a certain point that also dissolves. And then it just becomes like, oh no, this is just,
Yeah.
This is just
It was
hood
weird.
culture.
It was weird because right around like I think 86 is when like the burgeoning of what they called ragamuffin hip hop came out. So you
Uh-huh.
had the Asher D and Daddy Freddie, you had Shinehead, you had KRS-One and Just Ice, toasting. Heavy D shows up in 1987, but like you had like cats like Chub Rock. Later you find out he's West Indian. So it was just this thing where later on you had like um homegirl from Toronto, Missy Me, she does
Yeah.
Jamaican funk. So it's like there was always this West Indian, Jamaican, Trinidadian, influence. But Special Ed comes out 1989, he's Jamaican. But even Run DMC did roots rap reggae with Yellow Man. But like people just couldn't put their fingers on it. If they weren't part of the culture already, they were like, oh, rap and reggae, yeah, they're connected somehow, So they just attributed it all to it's black.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes I feel like, and when I read some of these conversations from a lot of these younger people, I it it's one of those things that scares me because it feels like what it is a very casual fan, layman,
Yeah.
white person's view that then gets sold back to the younger generations later on, and then they're like, oh yeah, that's what it is. Like they're being fed the same thing without having a direct connection to the generations before who were like, oh yeah, no, it wasn't like that because of XYZ.
Yeah. And the big issue is that I've experienced forever, going back to the old like days of the message board, was someone saying to me, oh, whatever. They don't want to listen or they don't believe you because how could you possibly be an authority? And it's just a thing where, especially now in the age of real time social media, and we've been removed from the era of you had to be an expert to talk about a specific subject or to have any type of cachet or to have any type of authority. Now that's all been removed. Anybody can speak on anything. And if you've been elevated by a specific space, or if you've been like deemed one of those people or one of those tastemakers or one of those just talking heads, then all of a sudden you're an authority over someone who might know more just because they see them and they're more visible.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Let's dig into that a little bit. The idea that for a lot of reasons, especially, me being an artist, and I'm sure also you being a journalist, the new era of no gatekeepers has been an awesome and amazing experience. At the same time, we've seen kind of like this degradation of expertise and trusted sources. What do you look back and wish for parts of the 90s, or are you glad that you can just go direct to consumer, let's say, per se, as it relates to your conversations or thoughts or opinions?
So, one of the things that was beautiful about the age of the blog and social media was that someone like me who really should have been instead of working, trying to get into journalism or cut my teeth at one of the many rap journalist outlets at the time, should have been trying to get in at the ground floor ego trip, should have been trying to get on at XXL or whatever have you. I instead decided to work at Tower Records and then Newberry Comics
Okay.
and CD Spins, And what happened was when that whole era of the real hip hop magazines, or real, I'm using air quotes because real is, subjective. The era of magazines like Stress, On the Go, all these magazines disappeared. A Mass Appeal switched over into something else. The graffiti magazines, like everything just changed over. And once that era ended, we were stuck with the sources. XXL had become like corporate, and like all the other magazines had like really gone to the wayside or taken a step back. So journalism was like, if you weren't in already, and a lot of people who were in were getting out and they were trying to go into the digital space or trying to get to the .com space or whatever. And if you weren't in already, you were going to have a hard time trying to break in. So what the blog era did for me was it gave me the opportunity to write about hip hop and rap and the culture freely and get an audience without having, the resume, or without having to knock on the doors or play the game. The problem is that was the case with everybody else, and they were just writing whatever.
Yeah.
Because they could. And people just looked at it as like, oh, it's a free for all. And all that matters is whoever gets the most numbers, whoever gets the most looks, as opposed to who does the best quality work and really cares. And that kind of bled over because a lot of the people that are tastemakers or whatever now, they had a specific niche or a thing that they did that got them over, and they liked what they liked, but they weren't like well-rounded experts in something. But since they were the people that were like chosen and dubbed the next thing, they all of a sudden were on all the panels, on all the shows, in all the magazines, and whatever they say is believed to be the gospel truth. When the fact of the matter is that, y'all got mad blind spots because there's a lot of stuff you don't know. And there are a lot of errors of things you didn't live and you didn't experience. And you can't differentiate what's fake or what's inaccurate from what's actual fact. And the people that can, they're left out on the fringes and they're like disenfranchised and, nobody's listening.
Yeah, it's a weird scenario because again, it's and I spoke about this a little bit with Justin Hunt. Just this idea that now that everyone is the brand, everyone is a brand, right? So even you on Twitter are a very specific kind of brand that you may have just been able to be an expert journalist with a, historic bend, having all of that knowledge. But now it's like, no, you kind of, do you feel yourself having to be a bit of the angry old man brand in order to make sure that everything else gets read, like the actual quality of the work gets paid, or the quality work gets paid attention to?
So here's the weird thing, right? There's nothing I hate more than being put into a box. So I would push back against a lot of that stuff, because what would happen was, when you're the angry old guy, you're all this. What happens is, people come to you, and they've been doing this for years. They come to me, it's like, "Hey, Dark, did you see this article?" And they're just waiting for me to rage. And I'm like, first of all, I'm one of the most even, and like, I'm super logical. So if I don't have all the facts in, and the big thing with a lot of people don't realize is, when you have a memory like mine, it kind of kills nostalgia. So there are a lot of things that people are nostalgic for, basically because they don't fully remember the whole experience 360 in its totality. I remember all of it, including the bad shit, right? So when people come to me, was like, "Hey, he said this about this," I'm like, well, I mean, that's kind of right, but he doesn't know exactly what he's talking about. Like, people would come to me and they'll be like, there wasn't any biting in my era. I'm like, dude, the second golden era was the era with the most biting. Why? Because the mainstream record labels, and there were the most amount of labels back then, anybody could tell you that, they saw what worked. And this is back when people were making money and people were selling units. So like, they saw what worked, and they needed their version of it. And so it's like, we need our Naughty by Nature. We need our Cypress Hill. We need our Wu-Tang Clan.
Or the kid version of it, or the women version of it.
Yes. So what happened was, I would pull out rap, because I keep everything, rap magazines, and I would just go through ads, and I'm like, Total Devastation. That's another Cypress Hill. Mad Flavor. That's the Dallas version of Cypress Hill. Or I would like bring out this magazine. I'd be like, these guys, Troubleneck Brothers. That was Stepson's answer to the Wu-Tang Clan. Black Monks. This is the Houston version of what was going on with the Wu. And I would just like try to explain to people, it's like, we had the most biters and the most people that sounded like somebody then. So it's like revisionist history to think everything was better back in the day. All the bad shit that you see now happened before. It just took on a different form, because energy doesn't die. It just changes form, or just presents itself in a new way. So for me, trying to be branded as the angry old guy, I always pushed back against it. But the thing is that I just like being accurate. I like accuracy. I like for people to do the work. And the problem is that, as you well know, it's almost impossible to do the work if you don't have a certain background, because you don't even know where to look. You don't know where to search. And all you have to do is, like they said when we played basketball, just scream help. If you don't know what you're doing, just ask for help. And there's plenty of people out here who have been around, who've lived it, who are human encyclopedias, who are living libraries, who, if you don't know something, just go to them, because you're not going to find it on Wikipedia.
So let's be real, though. Stupidity angers you.
Because, absolutely. Since I was a kid.
Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. Because I see, there still is you're not the angry old guy as it relates to new music or all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to an ignorant comment that someone won't back down from, you definitely go in.
Oh, yeah. I can't stand it. Because the thing is that people always say this, and it drives me insane. All you have to do is Google. That's bullshit. Because I can tell you for a fact, as somebody who remembers so much, I could Google something and I'll look at the information and I know this is going to lead you astray. This has so many omissions, it's crazy. If you try to quote this to somebody, you're going to look like an idiot if they actually know what they're talking about. So people will go and Google something and look up something and think that, here's the answer. when actually they can't differentiate what's fact from what's, has glaring omissions because they don't know. They just have to take everything at face value. So if you don't know who to go to or what resources to use to be accurate, you can't just rely on these two sources. You're gonna have to dig deeper. Nobody wants to do that kind of work. And I feel like the thing is that nobody knows they need to do that kind of work because they don't value it enough. And also, the financial rewards for doing that kind of work are negligible. And the
Does
speed
that
of
scare you?
yes,
That we are in this time now where it feels like everything that we grew up with, everything that exists, that has existed before, should be online. But having lived, you know that there are these glaring omissions
yes,
that the longer that time unrolls are just going to, if no one puts them there or if, nothing is done, it's just going to be lost to time. Yeah.
I think I think a bigger part of it too is that it goes straight directly in line with institutional racism. And this is why I feel this. Okay, when I research something, I know if I'm looking for a specific group or artist from a certain era, I can go find the Dick Clark archives for American Bandstand and find their performances and find the date and find who else was in the lineup. I know that if somebody was on Soul Train, I can find the date, the number of the episode, the performance. I know there's a database. I know that somebody took that, right? By the same token, fam, I was doing this piece and I was detailing the history of the East Coast West Coast rap beef, all right? And I know that it started from largely an appearance on Yo MTV Raps on a Friday where Fab Five Freddy had DJ Quick and Second to None on the show, right? And he asked them to freestyle. And they said they don't freestyle. Now, I was like, I know this. I saw it. I remember the reaction that happened not too long after that. Tim Dog made Fuck Compton. I remember there was a concert that came out. It was like all these cats, it was like Kid and Play and all these other dudes that was on a tour, and they were sitting around talking about that episode of Yo MTV Raps because everybody saw it while they were on tour. And then Fuck Compton comes out and all that stuff, and it's like everything spring rolls from there. So I know this happened, right? This is the thing. This is the jumping off point. And what I had to do was I was like, yo, I need to find the date of that specific episode of Yo MTV Raps. Because I knew that he put out an album in January 1991, but then I knew Second to None put out an album later, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, yo, when was the actual date of this episode? You know I couldn't find it? And you want to know why? Nobody had archived the 1988 to 1995 episodes of Yo MTV Raps anywhere.
Not even MTV?
Not even MTV. And I was like, how is that possible? It was only 7 years, And it's like, I know, because I've researched it, I know the day that the daily Yo MTV Raps episode started in March 1989 with Ed Lover, Dr. Dre, and T Money. Because I've done research and I've had to find these things on my own. There's no archive. There's no archive for the early episodes of Yo MTV, of Rap City on BET. There's no archive for Pump It Up episodes, Genius doesn't do that. So when we're trying to look for accurate information, there's nowhere to go. And it frustrates me because I actually know that there should be. And like, I deal with cats like Brian Coleman. Me and Brian Coleman talk, me and these other cats talk, and it's just like you have to go to archives like Bill Adler's and Cornell, drive down there, get permission, sign out something. You have to mimeograph stuff. It costs money. You're gonna have to wear gloves, just to find accurate information on stuff that happened in 87, 88, 89. See dates. Another thing that I do is I found a database that's nothing but old Billboard magazines, right?
Hmm.
So I go through the old Billboard magazines and I see all the ads for the for the black music and rap sections. So I know release dates and I look at entry dates for the charts and then I calculate how far back they started or if an album came out later and the song and I go to the black music charts because black music charts they track lower sales. So when you see the entry in the black music charts, that's a better indicator of when an album came out. And then you have to go look for when the single came out. I go to this is a lot of work. I go to college radio stations and I will go through their record archives and they put dates on when stuff got added. So I'll go through there and I'll write it down so I know. Or I take a picture with my phone so I know when the singles came out. And then I'll go check the radio charts. This is a lot of work that I do. And the thing is that again, I go back to the financial rewards or not the financial rewards that don't exist for doing this type of extensive work because the speed of real-time social media and everybody's attention span is so short that if you try to picture something like this, people are gonna be like, who's gonna want to read that?
Yeah, but it seems that there are spaces that are being built, like the library at Harvard, that could use this sort of knowledge base, because there is going to have to be this stuff. You hope if you can find it before stuff is totally destroyed. I feel like there's somewhere where you could still probably scour and find someone who taped a bunch of Yo MTV raps on VHS here, then someone else who's going to be has it here. I don't know if you have a relationship with them at all, but don't you think that there are places though that are trying to currently create that sort of those sort of archives?
Do I think there's a place that's trying to create those sort of archives? No. I think that there are places that would do it if you presented it to them and made it seem like it was mutually beneficial or it would interest them or be in their best interest to do it, and that it would it would bring attention to that space, because right now they don't care. Like, you have to pretty much shame people into doing anything nowadays in this space. Like, when somebody writes the wrong release date for something, I basically go and shame them and show them all the work and screenshots and break down everything and do the math for them before they're like, okay, we're sorry. Just to show them how much work needs to be done and how that your fingernails need to be dirty. But the thing is that nobody cares about that. They just want to get off this tweet. They just want to hop on Instagram. Any Instagram post or tweet that I post about a release date or something, real work went behind that. And I don't think a lot of people understand that. They just think that I just went one place and I saw a date and said, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, people weren't around for, most of these kids weren't around for like really digging in on LexisNexis or the old microfilm at the library or any of those sort of things where research actually took time to do rather than just look at a Wikipedia page, which may or may not be correct.
And the worst part is that they didn't, and the thing is that they also didn't go behind 5-6 guys, people years older than them back in 87, 88, 89 and dig through records and tapes and cassettes and remember everything that came on the radio and had to stay up late to record it because they didn't play it during the day. So it's like there's a whole lot of different layers there.
But so for you, where does this need to be the keeper of the the keeper of that Bible start? Like, were you just immediately from when you were young just really interested in history in general, or like does it come when hip hop comes in to your life?
Okay, so being a black Latino kid growing up in Boston in the South End, Lower Roxbury, so I was born 1975. I lived on the street, Mass Ave, between two streets, Columbus and Tremont. That means nothing to people outside of Boston. But that stretch right there is historic. because all the big jazz and blues venues in Boston and made it a jazz mecca back in the day are along this strip. And growing up in the 70s and the 80s meant that all the people that were around during that time when all these venues and clubs were hot and popping were old enough to tell me stories and tell my friends and everybody stories about shit that made us go, "You're lying." Because if this was true and all these things were happening in Boston and there was this amazing, huge, vibrant black culture in Boston to the point where people left Harlem, got on the train, and came to Boston, you gotta be lying. Because if that was the case, then there would be movies about Boston. There would be books about Boston. And they would tell me these stories. And I thought that they were pulling my leg and lying to the kid. When I got in my teens, in my early 20s, I found out they were true. I found out that Sammy Davis Jr. grew up in my neighborhood. I found out that Malcolm X used to hang out at all these different places in my neighborhood. I found out, that like Quincy Jones, when he went to what was the Schillinger School, later Berklee College of Music, lived in my neighborhood down the street on Pembroke, before he left for New York when he got a job offer. People are telling me stories about hanging out with Miles Davis, and he used to always come to Boston to pick his band. And when he got stuck, he would come to Boston to hang out. Or people would tell me stories about there was this thing called the cabaret card. I didn't know what they were talking about. The cabaret cards forced a whole bunch of Harlem musicians to not be able to work in New York. So what they did was they all got on a train, came to Boston, came to Back Bay Station, which is where Lower Roxbury and the South End are, and they just lived and worked in Boston for years. Cab Calloway got his start because his big sister was living in Boston and being a band leader for years. And then like he came here, did work with her, whatever, did shows here, and then he went back to New York. So like all this history was being told to me, and the old NAACP building, my old block is where Martin Luther King Jr. lived when he went to BU, and my neighborhood is where he met Coretta Scott.
Crazy.
So I've been told all these stories about like Black history that nobody outside of Boston knew. And that alone right there made me really super interested in history and Black culture. And also, in my neighborhood, we have Berklee College of Music, we have the New England Conservatory of Music, and the Boston Conservatory. So anytime you could be walking up and down the street and you would see buskers, you would see like bands and stuff like that. And I got to see a whole bunch of people that went and got famous just be the people in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So like all that made me really into like keeping track of stuff and like caring about the continuum.
Because you already saw that it could easily be erased if you didn't know, if you weren't talking to those people.
Yeah. It got erased in Boston. Only people that knew were us. Yeah. So I was like, well, if I extrapolate that can easily happen to Black music, because I would go back and I would like ask my elders about blues musicians or jazz musicians, and they were like, I don't know. Or I would go look up some records and I'd be like, yo, nobody knows anything about this person. They just know this record is a classic. They know nothing about the person. They barely know anything, because if you look at the liner notes, they didn't keep track of anything. And then you contrast that with growing up how I grew up, where journalism, right? So rock journalism cataloged everything. You had Crawdaddy, you had Cream, you had Rolling Stone, you had all these different magazines, right? And these people are all considered like the great music journalists. They cataloged everything to the point where they knew the day, and I say this all the time, they knew the day that Paul McCartney met John Lennon.
Yeah.
Do we know the day that Q-Tip met Fife? No.
Yeah, no. Not offhand. I would hope that somebody does, like Q-Tip, but maybe not.
But like, it's even to the point where like, so I found out at one point that the native tongues as we know them actually all first met at a show in Boston. And I was like, why don't we know the date? What was the show? Where was it at? Was it a Skycap? Was it here? Was it Narcissus? Where was it? Like
Yeah.
that's where I jump to, because I'm like, how come all these rock cats know everything? We know the date that Elvis recorded his first sides of Sun Records. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But like,
Do you think that stuff because at that time, well, I guess it wasn't even necessarily more mature, because at that time you were still only 30 years into the idea of the music industry in general. So I guess it can't, but do you think that maybe we're just now coming to that realization where this is that sort of stuff that we need to be paying attention to and trying to go back and do it before some of these people are gone?
I feel like that kind of started in 1990. And I think the thing that started everything, and I always go back to this, I've actually written about this. What happened was when the Source moved from Boston to New York, the first thing that they did, which was ingenious, was they made a magazine, an issue called The Rap Decade. I believe it was 1979 to 1989. And they began like documenting the first decade of rap's growth and hip hop culture and all this other stuff. And then one of the things that they did too was with the record report, they started calling albums classics with the 5 mic rating, the 1 to 5 mic rating. What that did, so humans by nature, what makes us different from other animals is that we're time binders. We
Explain that a little further.
Okay, so this is a lot of Harvard and anthropology, cultural anthropology. So what happens is the thing that makes humans different from every other, they have to compartmentalize events that happened in increments of time. So the year of the Great Flood, you know, the year that this volcano happened, the year of the invasion of the Hyksos, you know, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age. We have to put things in categories or spaces, and we have to document time. So the same thing happens with music. So that there's the LP era, you know, the late 60s on is the LP era, where like we go from music goes from being single based to LP based. But now the thing is that if you know enough about music, you know that you have to compartmentalize and differentiate genres. So there's the LP era, sure, for rock and jazz, but there has to be one for rap, because the LP era for raps actually starts with the first golden era, 1986 to 1989. Before 1986, rap was a single-based genre. There were very few albums. You know? Like between 1984 and 1985, there was very few rap albums, and very few of them were classics. 1986 was the first year where you could have a top 10 rap albums. Okay? 1987 is the first year you can have a top 10 rap albums and argue about what those top 10 rap albums are.
Okay.
1988 is the first year you can have a top 20 rap albums. 1989 is the first year you can have a top 20 rap albums and argue about what the 20 were. And you might even do 25.
Yeah.
By the time we get to 1990, it's a whole new ballgame, because 1990 starts off with the first rap single to hit #1 on the Billboard charts. And this is another thing I'm doing right now. I'm writing a piece. Nobody knows about this until right now. I'm actually writing a piece about what took so long for rap singles to actually hit #1 on the Billboard charts and what was impeding them. And I've been doing research on this for 6 months, and I had breakthroughs 3 months ago, and I've been figuring it out here and there. And the thing is that a lot of the stuff that I'm getting to right now, it's to the point where I don't know who to give it to. Am I gonna OK Player, Billboard? It's book material.
I hope you've been enjoying the conversation with Dart Adams. Once again, you can check me out, thefreerangepodcast.com, freerangetalk@gmail.com. I think it's really important that we have this discussion about this assumption that history will just kind of tell its own story. I'm also really glad that we have people like Dart Adams around that will dedicate their time and resources to making sure properly documented. You can follow him again at Dart Adams on Twitter. Follow me at GoOO. Let's get back to it. Yeah, I mean that's everything that you've kind of been that you've been talking out and really reminding me of. That's kind of why I brought up the hip hop archives at Harvard, because I feel like there needs to be not just the commercial facing space, like the publication in in a magazine or in an article or whatever of note, but that regardless, the research needs to be allocated somewhere so that there may need to be at this point, part of, and I always say this, but like so much of the reason even for this podcast for me is to start to try to dig deeper than just what casual fans sometimes consider the hip hop, right? In the very kind of like commercial rapper, producer, music industry focused. And while that part of that is true, and I know you have your very different ideas of obviously what the culture is versus the economic side of it. I do think that 40 years into commercial rap, we can kind of now expand the conversations, platforms, and ways in which we talk about it. So when you're talking to me, it's almost as if you almost need like a scientific journal, like in the way that research is done in academia, and then it's presented. You almost need it's not Psychology Today because that's just a regular magazine, but you need one of these scientific journals that is directly related to hip hop, where this can be published, where people who are interested and want this research to happen can
it'd have to be damn near a National Geographic.
Yeah.
Or like,
but there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's to me what the great thing about the culture is now, and it's something you touched on before, is that we're in the space now where like I always make this reference and no one knows except you will know this, which is like I feel like hip hop is Unicron, right? Like it can consume anything and then it remakes it in its own image. It can take a pair of socks, it can take sneakers, it can take clothes, it takes music, it takes electronics, it takes Twitter, it takes whatever gets presented, it can remake it in its own image, and then all of a sudden that's what it is. And to me, that's what makes it so powerful and goes back to the original comment is like, it's also extremely portable that way, in that its ideals are fixed and basic, that you can just send this packet to rural China, to Cuba, and they can say, oh, okay, this is the ingredients, and then put whatever I have into this, and now I am remaking. It's like you have the you open up the briefcase and it just washes over you in hip hop, and then boom, you can run.
It's like a mother box or a father box.
Yeah, but I do think that you should be thinking about it in these larger ways. It's like not even as a like direct, maybe sort of like, oh, it needs to be in a double XL or whatever. It's like, no, this could go in, because again, I don't know if Harvard even has that.
They have an archive. They have an archive, but they don't utilize it in that manner. And it's a conversation I've had several times with Marcelina, and I guarantee you, she does not remember us having the conversation, because I've had to introduce myself to her 18 times as it is, and I've had several friends that have been at Harvard and worked as Nas fellows. And if you go through the list, you're like, wait, I can't tell you how many times I've been to a panel or something, or a talk at Harvard, and I was invited by the people who are on the panel, and I went to Harvard, and I can go in the room and several people like, oh, it's dark. What's up? And the people there are just like, huh? I live over the bridge. Why am I not being utilized? You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I mean, I've run into a couple of issues like that, even within not even just in academia, but because let's be real, the conversation about hip hop and academia,
oh god,
in the way it's taking, but in the way that it's being taken a little more serious now, is so new and so. I think the reality is it needs actual practitioners
yeah,
to become a part. Ninth has done that. My partner, Knowledge and Kids in the Hall, is finishing up his PhD now at Northwestern, and so it's like there is gonna be a matriculation of hip hop academics that actually come from the culture, not in an outside way looking in. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years regarding that. Um, but yeah, I know that can definitely be an
super
extremely
frustrating.
frustrating thing. But it's we can talk after this because there's a lot of interesting things going on in that I feel like it's going to change over the next 5 to 10 years. But to so I was looking at an interview that you had regarding you blaming the old heads.
Oh,
the old heads who were about a certain kind of realness, of
oh god,
integrity
yeah.
that bowed out basically as the backpack era defines itself, and as the Jiggy era also defines itself, and the divergence in 97 happens. But do you like, because sometimes I feel like with history, we, as much as we actually have the facts, we still tell stories that may or may not be all the way true for that time. So even if the facts are true, like even if you talk about the Telecommunications Act, you can talk about all those sort of things are real, I still sometimes think that, like, because during that era, let's say you're talking immediately post the Tupac murder, Biggie murder, there's this shift like, oh, shit is way too serious. And
Well,
then you kind of get, obviously the Puff era really kicks in.
Questlove talks about the 1995 Source Awards as being the line drawn in the sand of the us versus them, which boiled over by the time we get to 1997. But one of the things that I found out is that nobody wants to look like the bad guy, and nobody wants to point the finger at themselves. So when I came out and I said that there were a bunch of cats that when shit got different and the radio changed and all of a sudden you couldn't find the people you want on the radio anymore, and all of a sudden you see like No Limit everywhere, you start seeing Cash Money taking over for the 99 and 2000, when you start seeing Hypnotized Minds, when you start seeing Tila, Remember Me Ballin', when you start seeing Gangsta Boo everywhere, when you start seeing like eight Ball and MJG when you didn't see them before, all of a sudden you start panicking. You're like, what's all this bullshit on the radio? And then they tapped out and everybody went underground. But the thing is that, like, they were like, I'll come back when it switches back over, because it always switches back over. What a lot of people don't realize, because they weren't around, in that tumultuous era between 1990 and 1992, essentially what happened was we went through something called the pop rap era, and we were waiting for that shit to die out. And when 1992 came up, basically it started out when KRS-One, threw PM Dawn off the stage, and then DOS Effects came out from the sewer, and all of a sudden it was the year of the underground, 1992. And everybody was doing the East Coast stomp and wearing vests, and everybody was keeping it real and representing, over the next couple of years. And what happened was, during that stretch, I was a kid who would go to the club or whatever and hang out, and we would dance, and we would be dancing to this new type of music in this house or whatever. And what happened was, eventually the New Jack Swing kids and the house kids and the club kids, looked at the hip hop kids and were like, yo, y'all are fucking up the vibe. Y'all complain when the DJ doesn't play enough hip hop for y'all. So we need y'all out the club. So they started instituting the rules, like the dress code and shit like that. Can't wear sneakers, can't have backpacks, can't have hats or whatever. And they kicked us out the club. And if you want to be a club kid and party, you was gonna have to wear some silk shirts, some flowy pants. You're gonna have to wear what we call the mailman shoes. You're gonna have to get your dreads, and you're gonna have to get your high top fade and dye it in the corner and look like Kwame. Get your polka dot shirt and get your dance on. And we were with our sneakers and our baggy jeans and our hoodies outside, like, fuck y'all for 2 years. And then what happened was when 1992 happened, I'll never forget this. When 1992 kicked off, going into 1993, everything switched. So all the kids in the club, all of a sudden, and I'll never forget this. MTV used to have this thing called Club MTV.
Uh-huh.
Right when 1992 ended, they discontinued Club MTV because the waves had changed and it was like a new era and it was a new sea change, right? So then they created The Grind. And on The Grind, what did they play? Everything. Because the times had changed and the era had changed. People were dressing different. The music had taken on a different tone. A lot of the groups that were hot over the last couple of years just died out, you know? So it's like, that's what happens. And a lot of people don't realize that. It happens again and again. This time what happened was the shit that was hot for 5 years stopped being hot. Big fucking surprise.
Yeah.
So cats were like, oh, we'll just stop and wait for this whole era to be over. Then we'll come back. Here's the thing. It never ended.
But let me ask you this, because sometimes I think that is did the people who bowed out ever even really have control, though?
No.
You know, like, ultimately what we're talking about is this shift that happens in the late 90s where the rest of the country that is not New York and LA comes online.
But here's the other thing, too. A lot of us were spoon-fed everything, and we don't like to admit it. The reason why cats was fucking around and buying Fat Joe is because you could pick up a mainstream publication, and Relativity Records had an ad in that mainstream publication. When you turn to MTV, bam, the Fat Joe single Flow Joe is playing on your television. When you watch BET, bam, Flow Joe or Watch the Sounds playing on your television station, you know? And when you listen to the radio, it's playing because it's on a major label. Now, the thing is, what happened is the shit that you saw on TV and was made available for you and was given to you and pushed out by a major label with all this marketing shit in 93, 94, 95, 96 was no longer being pushed out in 97, 98, 99. So what was is what became popular or what was put out there.
Yeah, because they never have an obligation to stay and stick to whatever the culture thinks. They have to react to what moves in the marketplace.
Exactly.
And people if the marketplace changes,
Here's another thing that pissed me off, and I know you understand what I'm saying here. So a lot of people scapegoated Southern rap with killing hip hop or making it trash, which is bullshit. It's simple economics. If you can sell 200,000, 250,000, 300,000 units in between 5 to 10 states alone with no radio play, like no national marketing, national
you have a product that people want.
And no video airplay. If you're a record label and you're like, wait a second, if we invest just this much, this album is gonna go gold. If we invest this much, this album might do platinum plus. If we partner with these people, it's gonna cost us even less money. And what did they do? Just that. And what happened? They put the album out, 2 million copies sold when it sold 350,000 in 6 states. Yeah. And their videos playing. Big surprise. and apparently people liked it. You know what I'm saying? And also, it had to do with the fact that like I just think about this. Had those groups that I liked back in the '90s, in the early '90s, who were like suppressed for so long, if they actually got national distribution back then, things could have been evened out by the time we got to the 97, 98, 99 era. But that wasn't the case. And people don't understand that because they don't see the other side. They don't realize that 8 Ball and MJG had to re-release all their old albums because this was the first time a lot of people up north were actually seeing them.
So then, do you think inherently that sometimes the problem, especially with East Coast bias, that that especially around during that time and still exists, is that there is an idea that they're maybe worried more about the aesthetics of hip hop than actually just kind of like meeting the people where they want it.
I think it also has a lot to do with paranoia and xenophobia on some level because I saw it start to happen. I think one of the greatest things that ever happened, 1989, um, Straight Outta Compton comes out. Yes, the album came out in 1989. Somewhere between January and February 1989, January and March 1989. It's a long discussion. But the album comes out and it starts climbing up the charts, right? And what happened with that album was it kind of forced New York to give it up and say, fine, fine, California, okay, we get it. You make good rap, all right, but you're not better than us. Then what happened was more Compton artists came out. They started making more albums, more classic albums, and then more shit started popping up. And then what really happened was when we get to the Freestyle Fellowship, Good Life era. You know, over here we have in New York you had the Lyricist Lounge and New Yorican Poets. That whole era, there were so many cats coming out from the West Coast that were dope and highly influential that were influencing what was happening in New York to the point where I think a lot of people were like, oh, no, 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 no. You know what I'm saying? Like they started getting scared and then they needed to bring New York back. New York never needed to be brought back. You know,
Yeah.
it was just that them being scared of, oh, we got to share the stage when it should have been, oh, y'all are pushing us and making the art great. But no one saw it like that. They just saw we need to bring New York back. So when Biggie came out and Nas came out, they were like, yeah, we have our guys. We're back on top. When Wu-Tang comes out, yeah, we're back on top. Yeah. And it was like a battle back and forth. You know, when Snoop comes out, people are like, boo. And then when Outkast, it's crazy. People don't realize Outkast came out the week after Nas' Illmatic. You know, and people like to talk about Illmatic. Illmatic got outsold by Shaheem the Rugged Child, and Outkast really outsold it.
Yeah, I always laugh when I tell people my introduction to Outkast was on the LaFace Christmas album
Yeah,
that my dad bought. Where it was the Christmas version of Players Anthem, with the bells and the lyric changes, where they changed the hook to on Christmas Day at the end. But it's one of those things. It's funny because it's yeah, the way a lot of stuff rolls out, people just never truly paying attention to. But then that's where, to me, that's always where the weird thing about history comes in, because again, there's the fact, right? There is a fact that like, oh, the LaFace album comes out on this day, and they use that as a catalyst a bit for or a springboard for Outkast. But most people probably get put on the Outkast months later, like you said, when their actual album comes out. Do you sometimes think facts get in the way of the actual nature of how a lot of these movements or how a lot of these things develop?
I think that what happens is that there are people that have accounts and they are based on real hip hop or this and this or rap hits or this and this, and they just go to a blanket date and say the single dropped on this date or the album dropped on this date. And what the thing is that what you're doing is you are leaving out all the context behind it, because a lot of times the story doesn't just end or begin with that specific date you picked. Sometimes albums take long times to, a long time to, cook. They take a long time to build. Sometimes you need a second single. Sometimes you need a guest appearance. Sometimes you need it doesn't tell the story about, like, for instance, one thing it doesn't tell the story about is Outkast appearing on MTV Spring Break and they're matching Adidas outfits, and their Adidas gear. And what happened was MTV played that Spring Break performance so much that there was an East Bay catalog that was out at the time. And the outfits, the tracksuits, and the specific Adidas equipment that they wore, the green and blue joints, sold out on East Bay. And this is in the days when you had to pick up the phone and call and ask to see if they had
good
something.
old calling East Bay.
Yeah. And you would call and you'd be like, oh no, we sold out of that. That's when I knew Outkast was out of there. When they did Hootie Who live.
Yeah.
And I knew they were out of here. And the thing is that, like, that's not covered in the dates.
Yeah,
also,
but again,
the other issue with dates
people don't pay attention enough. And so, like, to move it forward a little bit is like, how do we try to now, 40 years in, future proof, if we can, the even the eras that we definitely came up in, because let's think about it now, and obviously we're talking about things that happened in the 90s and the 80s, and that's going to already be, and I don't know, but even things that occurred during the 2000s, the blog era in general. I was in my head, I was mulling this over, and I was like, someone may need to go and do a documentary, because right now is going to just be that time to try to get as much information as possible before, again, it just gets forgotten about. Because, like, even for Kids in the Hall, our first entry into the blog space outside of the lesson on OK Player is like Hip Hop Game posting things, and they've just gone.
Cats don't remember Hip Hop Game. Hip Hop Game was where we went for everything. It would have every exclusive. Yeah. There was this group called Potter's Field, and this dude, Saint Laz. They were like,
I remember Saint Laz.
They were the kings of Hip Hop Game and Dat Piff for years.
Yeah.
But, like, you would go there for everything. And then there was this other thing called DSC, The Saga Continues, which was really like a Wu-Tang fan site. So any Wu-Tang offshoot song, there was just like a Lucy you would find there. Then you would go to, like, any other, like, just site. And it was like the internet was the wild, wild west. But, like, one weird thing with the blog era is that, so this is where we learned leak math. Back in the days, you would type in to Google the name of the album and RIR or ZIP.
Uh-huh.
And back in the days, as you know, this was the early days of the promo. So you could find it, download it, and then you would jump on all hip hop. If you had a certain amount of posts or a certain amount of cachet, you could access the different back rooms of these sites, where everybody traded everything, where everybody had zip files and raw files. And so they had every album, instrumentals, vinyl, everything. And also on OK Player, we had what we used to call inbox records. We said OK Player / imprint inbox records.
Like inbox me.
Inbox me. So the thing is that dates don't matter as much in this era because we got stuff early. So we would be talking about, like, unreleased stuff or the first version. Like, for me, one of the biggest dates or one of the biggest stretches of time for that era is the first version of Lupe Fiasco's Food and Liquor. The first, to me, the leaked version with the wrong names was a classic album. And the commercial album that they put out was good, but it wasn't as good as the original version, you know? The original version, I feel, was a classic album.
Yeah, I think that, obviously being on the inside of that situation, for me, it's simply one of those things is when you leak the album, whoever leaked the album, it destroyed any chances of the major label album being what it could have been, because you basically have leaked records with samples that now it's going to be impossible to get cleared, that now, before any real decisions could be made, you forced a hand. It's like, imagine trying to come out with the album of all, like Fabulous Breathe, where the group took 100% of the publishing. It would have been impossible. Although we just did the 12th, I guess it's not an anniversary, but we just did Food and Liquor top to bottom with a full band, and it still feels pretty amazing. There are some songs that I miss off the leak, but I do understand kind of like where it goes. But you're right. There were these things. It's funny. I also there was another, one of the most, to me, oddly enough, like, and this is just me from an R&B side, like influential albums for me during that era is, a Kylie Dean album called Simple Girl.
Simple Girl.
And it never came out. But it exists, right? But it exists in the space.
How many people did you know that were in the same space that had Simple Girl, that talked about Simple Girl like it was a released album, just to go out and like amongst what I like to call civilians, just to discover that, like, what are y'all talking about this album for? That never came out. Only thing that happened was like they put out the single and they had two different versions for the video. You know,
and the single was a mistake.
Yes.
To do that at the time. And then everything else just gets shafted. But you're right. This is an era where it's going to be really hard to chronicle it, because you do have versions of albums that are not the version. Because obviously Napster, Kazaa, all that, LimeWire version.
Love for Sale.
Yeah, stuff that just never came out, or leaked demo versions that people love more than the actual joint because they were able to get it. And so that alone makes people like it more. I remember definitely this era where it's so funny because you'd have 128-bit or kilobyte, like MP3, and then the quality version had come out, but you'd been listening to the bad MP3 so long, you were just like, nah, I kind of like this grimier, grittier one.
So the weird thing is that I feel like the last time that happened for me specifically was so Kanye West puts out My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
I hear the album, but I'm disappointed because I had the original leaked version with the unfinished, I'm using air quotes, you can't see, songs. So the original version of All of the Lights without all the extra trimmings, I loved.
Yeah, the more stripped down version of that, I will argue, Zoel, is also probably it got a little too big. But yeah, no, that and it's so weird now because what technology did at that, I guess that's going to be a whole different era, when we go back and actually catalog it, because it does become now the era of probably the disintegration of the album as we know it.
So it was this really weird era where if I didn't like a song on your album, I would replace it with a song from your mixtape. And you put it on your iPod. I would put them on my iPod Touch. And if I didn't like the album artwork, I would go online and find somebody who made album artwork that was better and I would put that as the album artwork in my iTunes, and I would put that on my iPod Touch. You know?
Yeah, no, that's crazy. You know, watching the speed of everything change and the watching the speed of everyone's interactions change has definitely made it made all of everything as it relates to hip hop interesting. But I do hope that whether it becomes your life's work or somebody else's that's listening to this, that more effort is taken into preserving these sort of things. Because even from a media standpoint, you know, what I notice is that it's, even let's say with Blogspot disappearing, right, when that was taken down. Yeah. Granted, obviously, you know, you're illegally downloading stuff, but there were so many like funk records or so many soul albums from groups that no one had ever heard of that were now available in a database that hadn't existed prior to, that people had access to, that they could sample from, that they could do whatever they needed to, that, you know, now no longer exists because all those links are dead. And it's just like, what is, yeah, that can happen very easily with hip hop. Even, you know, even for example, even Kids in the Hall, like when Raucous once again folded, and moved on and moved over to Up Rocks, our first album just disappears online. And this is 2006. And that easily, that quickly, it's just not around. And I think people don't realize that all of this stuff still operates with people. And if no one uploads it because you're assuming that this other person is going to do it, or you're assuming that this other person is going to talk about it, or this other person is going to have the repository of information, then it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I am happy that you were the one, at least, you know, that have tasked yourself with doing some of it.
I mean, we talk about Just Blaze TV clips like,
yeah, it's gone
that 20 years ago.
Yeah,
you know?
And it's gone. Like those first era. I was just talking about it with the band today, or with the band the other day when we were rehearsing for the Food and Liquor show, and the drummer was talking about how important, you know, Show Me What You Got was to the musicians' world at that time. And so, you know, I was talking about the whole Just Blaze TV stuff, and yeah, they have no clue. You know, because it got deleted by mistake. That was a YouTube thing that happened because when Just switched from a regular account that they used to have to a creator account, it would erase what existed for some weird reason. And so all those first Just Blaze TV joints that were on MySpace are just, yeah, they're gone somewhere. I mean, maybe they're on a hard drive somewhere, but yeah.
It's just insane to think, because like I can go anywhere and I can talk to somebody who can quote these videos that they saw back in 2006, 2007, word for word, like verbatim. Rico Tizio, nasty ass denim. You know? Like, it's hilarious.
Yeah, but that's another thing. That's one of those where it's like very quickly and very easily it's almost as if you're talking about something that doesn't exist because
it's something that happened nowhere. It's something that happened to me too. I used to have a podcast / radio show called the Scrunch Face Show, and on that show I played a lot of artists early, cats like Kate Renata back when it was Kate Radames, you know, like a bunch of like cats in the beat culture early on, like when they just had stuff on SoundCloud and Bandcamp, you know, and they were like sending me zip files for beats to play live. And I did a lot of interviews. I did the final interview with Clip Mode Sound Agency as Clip Mode as they broke up. I had them, that final thing, on my show. They played beats live, Knowledge played beats from a beat tape that he was just uploading at the time he was on the show. Like I did interviews with I did the interview where so Pete Rock and Grap Lover. So Grap Lover on my show told everybody that Center of Attention was not the name of the album. It was the life I live, and that he has the album with the original, with the actual sequence, with the interludes, with the songs and the titles that are supposed to have, and they're going to release it. And like I had that interview. I had all these, like, I interviewed Knots. I did all these like interviews, and it all disappeared because one of my partners didn't renew, the thing for the and all of a sudden the site, bam, all those 52 episodes gone overnight. And it's like, I know everything that happened off the top of my head. I can go back to people and they can recall when they listened to it. Don't have any of them. The hard drive I had everything on crashed 3 years ago. So it's just like gone. Just memories.
It's crazy, man. This stuff is the digital space is a lot more delicate than people want to assume that it is. You just look at something online and it just works, and that's just supposed to be it. But it certainly is not the case. Yeah. But with that, I'm going to make sure that this thing is properly uploaded so we have it for posterity's sake. Thank you again for your time. And I'm sure we'll talk again because I know you and I can go deep into any year and or any sort of era and talk about it forever. But man, thank you for coming on.
No doubt, it's what I'm here for, man.